So I'm going to talk a little bit about repairing damaged knives. Um, and I'm going to actually fix these two knives on the camera in this video. This one is a buck, the buck model. My eyesight's not so great here at the moment. 186. And it's got a broken tip. So I will be re-tipping it. This is a liner lock design with a thumb hole opener, and it's got a finger choil up here, kind of like some Spyderco designs. Pretty comfortable handle, and I believe this uses the 420HC steel that Buck uses on many of their American knives. So yeah, I'll be regrinding this from the spine to give it a new tip, and similar process for this knife. This is the Mass Drop Brad Zinker Warncliffe. This is an interesting knife. It's got a titanium frame lock handle. It's a compound grind S35VN steel, so this is a harder steel. And these are made by We in China. Should be able to see that S35VN. It's a little hard to pick up there, but yeah, there it is. S35VN. Yeah, so I expect that this buck knife will be easier to reprofile because the steel is not quite as hard. Even though Buck does a good job with the heat treatment, 420HC steel is a good deal softer than S35VN. I've done this before with some knives that needed repair. One that I showed briefly in a previous video was this Boker Gent, the Damascus blade. This had a broken tip, and I reprofiled this. In this case, I came at it primarily from the blade side to bring it back to a tip. I'm going to approach these knives from the spine. This is a flat grind. The buck is a hollow grind, and the Zinker Mass Drop knife is a compound grind, but it's, for the, part of the knife that we're going to be working on is just a flat grind up front. For that matter, the other part is also a flat grind, but it's different edge angle. So yeah, this was maybe the first knife that I reprofiled, and I didn't do a perfect job on it, but I'm okay. I mean, it looks better than it did with a broken tip. I tried this again with a Endura Damascus. This is a Knife Joy exclusive Endura that had a broken tip when I got it used, and I reprofiled this. I did come at it from the spine this time. Enduras have an unusual shape, and I didn't actually have a flat ground, Endura 4 handy to compare this to as I was reprofiling it, which was probably a mistake. The Enduras that I had were older models, and I had some with the Emerson Wave, which has a different blade shape. But if you look at like a Delica, which is similar, it has a has a pretty straight line here, almost a Warncliffe-like clip to it, and then it has a little drop at the end, right? I mean, it has a pretty straight line, and then the angle changes, and it drops down a little bit of a almost a sheep's foot kind of gesture just before the tip. I mean, I'm not saying this blade profile is sheep's foot. It's not, but you know, the angle changes from a pretty steep one to a well, from a pretty gradual one to a steeper one, rather. Um, so, yeah, I tried to imitate that with the Endura, you know, but didn't quite get the same look. But anyway, it does have a tip now, and it didn't before, so it's an improvement, right? I also retipped this little Spyderco Cricut. This thing was in terrible shape when I got it. I got this at the state surplus store where TSA confiscated knives end up in Texas. And this thing was just covered in rust and had pitting on it. It still has some pitting, but it's a lot less obvious now. The serrations were in pretty good shape, but it did have a broken tip. And you can kind of tell that something's not quite right about the tip now. I wasn't able to quite restore the entirety of the bevel. But you know, it'll pierce now, which it wouldn't before. I mean, not cleanly. So that's an improvement. But the one I'm most proud of that I've repaired recently is this Tops MSF4. I think MSF stands for something like mini Scandi folder or something like that. This is a Scandi ground blade, and this thing was beat to hell when I got it. The tip was broken off, and it had several significant chips in the blade. And I will add a little link up at the top right of the screen in this video that will take you to the video where I showed the batch of knives that I got from the state surplus store that included this one. You can look in that video and see sort of what condition it was in when I got it. So Scandi grind is in some ways easier to sharpen than something like a flat grind with a secondary bevel, because you have such a large bevel surface that's easier to sort of match that angle with a stone if you're reprofiling a knife with a whetstone. But it also means you get a lot of material to remove to get through any chips. And I did have to spend quite a while grinding on this thing, and I went through several different coarsenesses of stone. I started with a really coarse stone that was sort of, I started with the puck. I think Smith's or Worksharp or one, I can't remember which brand it is, but there's a sharpening stone called the puck that's coarse on one side and even coarser on the other side. It's sort of shaped like a hockey puck, and it's designed for sharpening axe blades. And I use that, just to sort of rough out the blade profile, and then I switched to legitimate whetstones. Or wait, did I do that with this one? I did that with the Boker. I think actually with the Tops knife, I just started with a very coarse whetstone. It's probably 180 grit or something like that. I mean, it was very, very rough. Yeah, I took off a lot from the spine to get past the broken tip, and give it a tip again. And then I also had to take some off from the entire length of the blade in order to get the chips out. But yeah, so not as much work on these two as I did on this tops, but we'll see if we can fix them up. I've got a little more experience under my belt now, having done this a few times, and hopefully these will come out easily. I will, I'm not going to do the whole process on camera because it would be really long, a really long and tedious video. But I'll get a little bit of the different steps and edit those together so you can see the process that I go through to take care of these. Yeah. All right, so I've got this sharpening stone here. This is a cheap-ass sharpening stone. This is like $6 from, I think I got this from Chicago Knife Works or someplace. And yeah, it's medium grit. It's kind of a coarse grit to a medium grit. It's like 200 and something to 300 and something. Which, if you're doing woodwork, something in the 220 range would be considered fine, but for knife sharpening, that's pretty coarse. And that's going to allow us to grind off some material from this blade to try to get the tip back. And it doesn't really need to be a super high quality stone for this roughing work, because we're going to subsequently, after we kind of get the grind into the right shape, we'll go and refine it with a higher quality material as we start to clean it up and then eventually polish it. So yeah, also, when you're taking a lot of material off of a blade, and especially if you're like rubbing a small area of the blade into the stone, you're going to end up removing some of the stone too, and making it sort of less consistent as a plane. Now you can re-flatten a stone using a special kind of stone that's designed for that, but if you're going to be beating up a stone pretty badly in the process of reprofiling or retipping a knife, might as well use a cheap stone for that. So yeah, in this case, I'm going to use a little bit of honing oil. Right, my higher quality stones, I usually use water as the lubricant. Water stones. In this case, I think honing oil is fine. I'm going to put a little bit on there. Rub that in. A bit more. Okay. And I'm going to come in from the spine, and I'm going to try to match this curve and just remove enough material that we end up intersecting the tip at an acute angle, so we don't have that sort of busted off flat area at the end. Now this is S35VN steel, as I mentioned before, so it's relatively hard, and it might take a while to remove enough material to get to that tip. And I'm rocking it to preserve I'm not trying to put a facet on here. I'm not trying to put a flat angle on this. I'm trying to preserve that gradual curve. So, and yeah, that's going to scrape up. That's going to end up putting, some scratches in that spine that are going to be noticeable. They're not going to be as smooth as that semi-polished spine, but that's fine, because we're going to go in and we're going to touch this up with progressively finer grits, and eventually we'll get to where everything looks nice and shiny instead of all scratched up. And you can see this is removing a little bit of material. See? Little iron filings there, or steel filings. And I'm doing it right now, reaching around the tripod for this camera, which is a little bit awkward. Let's go ahead and add a little more oil. Yep, getting there. Starting to look more like a point, right? Almost got a point back. Not quite. Almost there. All right, we're getting pretty close. I could probably at this point switch to a little bit finer grit that's still going to be removing material, but a little less aggressively. Yeah. Let's go to this side. So we're going from like 220 or something to 330, something like that. I can't remember exactly. And this stone is not marked. A lot of stones will have it stamped on the end, but not this one. This is bargain basement stone. But yeah, this is, more coarse than 400 grit. Okay, and then so now as I'm doing this, I'm still removing material, but less of it with each pass than I was on the coarser grit. And yeah, this is bad for the stone. I'm creating a little gouged tracks in the stone, which would make it bad for general sharpening purposes. But And as you can see, that tip is kind of on the spine side. It's got some scratching on it. So we're going to polish that out. First, we're going to get, beyond the scratches of the coarsest stone here. Still want to take off a little bit more. I want a little bit more of a point on there. It's getting there. Okay, it looks like it's a little better on one side of the blade than the other. Some sharpening will probably bring this up just a hair. I don't want to take a lot off of the edge side of the blade because it's going to get progressively thicker. We want it to stay nice and thin behind the edge, so by removing the material from the spine, we're getting past that broken tip without losing that thin edge. Right? If we could come at this from the front, and it would help us to get the tip back, but it would also eat into our cutting edge, and we'd be going progressively up the side of the blade as it gets thicker with that taper. So the knife would be less efficient as a cutting tool. All right. Once you get your edge, your tip into pretty much the shape that you want, you can start using finer materials. This is a 600 grit sandpaper, and it's a wet dry sandpaper, and that's going to get rid of a lot of those visible scratches on the spine and get us close to the factory pattern, like the grind from the factory tooling. We're still removing material at 600 grit sandpaper, but not nearly as much. Okay. From this side, it looks pretty good. From this side, we're still not a real pointy point. So I want to try to work more on And now that grain in the spine is, you know, the scratches are more or less consistent with the kind of scratches that it had from the factory tooling. Yeah, so we're getting pretty close here. I think once I sharpen this blade, it's going to have an edge that I'm pretty satisfied with at this point. So yeah, there's the dog tooth from Mass Drop. It's a Brad Zinker design, retipped. And I'll show you, I already worked on this buck a little bit. And same process. I ground off from the spine until I had a tip. And then I went in here and sharpened the edge. Now, since this is serrated, it's a little tricky because there's not a secondary bevel on the serration side of the blade, and there wouldn't have been even up here on the plain edge section of the combo blade here, right? But there is now, because when you sharpen from this side, you end up raising a burr, and then you got to knock that burr off. So, you know, I came in at a really shallow angle to try to knock that burr off without creating a lot of a secondary bevel here. And then I ended up sort of using sandpaper so that I could sort of approximately follow the hollow shape of the grind from this side to kind of clean it up a little bit. Yeah, this would be easier with a plain edge than with serrations, where it had, you know, if with a plain edge, it would have a micro bevel or a secondary bevel on both sides. So I could get a little bit more of a symmetrical grind. This is almost I mean, it's not really a chisel grind because it does have a hollow ground edge here. It just doesn't have a secondary bevel. So you've got asymmetrical edge geometry. Just the way that a lot of combo knives work because of the way you do serrations. So this was easier to grind than the Mass Drop because this is the 420HC steel, which is not nearly as hard. And it's screaming sharp right now. I've already sharpened this up. The edge did have some chips in it, so I had to sharpen past those. So we lost a little bit of from the spine and from the edge in order to get this, but not a lot. I mean, you can see from the serration that I didn't have to raise the edge a lot. Yeah, it's not as thin behind the edge as it used to be because we have had to sacrifice a little bit of edge. But there we go. There's retipping a couple of knives. And I hope this was useful. I'll see you next time.